Okay. Well, welcome, David Gregory, to the Mindframe Screen Anarchy podcast. I am super excited to talk to you. First of all, I wanted to thank you for sending copies of Kathy's Curse, The Great Alligator, and Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker. I didn't realize you guys were making these slips so
Oh
firm,
yes, oh yes, they've got quite sturdy in recent years.
which is really fun. I think a lot of people don't like to collect them just because they kind of think of the old slips and they think of how easily damaged they would be. But these things are actually pretty hard. Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker. What a performance by Susan Terrell. My
Isn't
God.
it? Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, she is utterly unhinged in that film.
and now absolutely immortalized. I'd like to think that 4K is going to be the iteration that the aliens find. If nothing else, they were survived because they were in 4K.
And funnily enough, they'll find Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker before they find Fat City. So, that's which is a good thing for Susan, if you ask me, and her unhinged performances.
Well, that leads us right into the box set that we're here to talk about
Yeah.
and the tour that you're on, which, if I may say so, when I heard about it, I thought, oh God, what batshit thing have they thought up now over at Severin? You are in the habit of rescuing cinema and of presenting cinema and preserving cinema that previous generations, in the age of being able to get a hold of everything, have just completely neglected, and you've staked yourself on it, and son of a gun, there's an audience out there for it, and a group of people that want to talk about it knowledgeably and sometimes even thematically and academically. Did
Oh,
you
yes.
did you know this going in to this? Or
Well,
did
with
you discover?
Bruceploitation, it was actually because the box that we're doing now in the tour that we're doing now is with my documentary Enter the Clones of Bruce and the subsequent box set, which will be landing next month, which is the Game of Clones Bruceploitation collection. I did not know if there was going to be a fan base for this because this is something that I had kind of forgotten about in the intervening years from when I was kind of tricked into renting some of these films, thinking that they were Bruce Lee films. After seeing Enter the Dragon and being kind of wowed by Bruce Lee's skills. But after we did a trailer compilation called Kung Fu Trailers of Fury a few years ago, I met Michael Worth, whose area of expertise is Bruceploitation. And it was interviewing him. I was like, okay, this could be the subject for the next feature documentary because I've done documentaries on the making of the island of Dr. Moreau. I've done documentary on the Al Adamson story. And if it's going to be a standalone feature, it has to have a significant story that I think is worthy of being a feature film as opposed to a special feature on a disc. So this was it. And I wanted to know what became of Bruce Lee and Bruce Lee and Dragon Lee and what they were thinking when they were making these movies. Was it just brazen exploitation of a dead person? It was because that's how it read quite a bit, but certainly in the advertising and the titles and things like that. But no, sure enough, I mean, you can't just become an expert in kung fu. And when you look at Bruce Lee, he actually really is going for it with his performance. So there was definitely going to be more to it than that, and I presumed that would be the case. So that's why I wanted to get these guys' feelings on the whole thing. So we went over to Hong Kong with the help of co-producer Frank Zheng, who was also on that Kung Fu Trailers of Fury commentary and track these guys down. Started talking to them, talking to some of their co-stars, some of the directors, some of the distributors, and then some of the distributors in the US and France, which is the second most popular territory for this subgenre. Because they're the ones who really made it into pure exploitation to get people in to see the film, often under very false pretenses about it being a Bruce Lee movie. So, it's one of those areas. I love stories about the trenches of independent exploitation filmmaking at the best of times, but this was a subgenre that I didn't know enough about and I wanted to explore. So that's kind of where we went there. And as now we're finding, having festivaled the documentary for almost a year now, there's people everywhere who are fascinated by this genre, and like a lot of them, like me, they like forgot about it, since because it kind of disappeared for quite some time. It was the stuff of bargain bins in Walmart, of DV three movies on a DVD kind of stuff, and they'd never actually been restored or looked at or had any kind of deep investigative, journals written about them or documentaries made about them. Certainly not in the English language. So that's where I saw the gap and wanted to pursue it.
You know, it's the fascinating thing about this stuff for me is it's a step up from the Italian ripoffs and the Turkish ripoffs. You think of Star Wars, you think of Jaws, you think of The Exorcist, but none of those movies claimed to star Linda Blair. None of those movies claimed that they were directed by William Friedkin or that they were the movies
Yeah.
that. And these guys, man, they just took it to a whole nother level. They were just like, fuck it, we're gonna like throw ourselves out there. If butts get in seats, then dollars get in the bank. And that was
Yeah,
it.
and often the posters would or the trailers would say we guarantee the real Bruce Lee, because people were getting wise to it eventually. But that real Bruce Lee might be, a clip from him as a child in a TV show in Hong Kong because he starred in TV and starred in films in Hong Kong when he was a kid. But there's no kung fu in them. And or even worse, sometimes he's dead in his coffin because he had an open casket funeral. So basically, that counts as having the real Bruce Lee in your
Well, then
film.
didn't and yeah, I was gonna say they used that image on a poster, didn't they?
They did. There was what the Black Dragon Revenges of the Death of Bruce Lee, starring Ron Van Cleef, actually used that image on the poster for a while. That poster was actually withdrawn because that people considered that might be a step too far. But even the Golden Harvest film, The Game of Death, which stars the real Bruce Lee, but he only shot about 20 minutes of footage
Right.
before he moved on to Enter the Dragon, and then he died before Enter the Dragon came out. So he never finished The Game of Death. So even the official Bruce Lee film, The Game of Death, contains footage of his funeral and that kind of thing. So that even they went down the same route,
And
using bubbles and things like that.
there are around 500 or so of these movies that purport to be connected to Bruce Lee, but in reality aren't. How many separate Bruce Lee knockoff performers were there?
Well, that's also hard to say. I mean, there are three main ones. There's Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee, and Dragon Lee, and they did many movies between them as either as playing Bruce Lee or playing Bruce Lee like, or at least starring in sort of sequels or films that were inspired by his kung fu, by his Jeet Kune Do, that kind of thing. So those were kind of the three main ones. Then there's a fourth, Bruce Leung, who played Bruce Lee in at least two films and called himself Bruce Leung in more than that. But he, was in many films where he just used his real name and still working today as an action choreographer. But then there are many other examples where the name of an actor was changed to be like Bruce Lee. So, for example, Karate, who was a famous Japanese karate expert, was in many movies. But when his film The Tiger's Claw was released in the US, they changed his name to Bruce Lowe on the poster and in the trailer so that they could, just have another Bruce on the poster. And even Sonny Chiba was called damn, I can't even remember what it is now, but it was Bruce something. Yeah. So basically, there's many where it was just done by the distributor in the US or in Germany or France where they changed the name of the star so that it had Bruce in it or Lee in it.
In a way, it's interesting because if you think, America is a country, we talk a lot about rugged individualism and we really appreciate the individual who finds a way. And in a lot of ways, that's what these people were doing was
Yeah.
this huge thing had brought their national cinema into prominence and they were trying to find a way to continue it.
That's exactly right. And their biggest star, their biggest export died right as it was getting internationally popular. So there was actually a gap in the market, and the audience did actually want to see more. I mean, there was a I think there's a certain amount of people who, yes, were tricked into thinking they were seeing another Bruce Lee film, but then there was the people who just liked martial arts movies after becoming fans of Bruce Lee, who wanted to see more. So they were fine with the fact that it wasn't the real Bruce Lee, because they got to actually see more Bruce Lee adjacent movies, you know.
Have you been able to connect in this body of cinema a group of sort of knowing, winking parodies where people are sort of owning up to the fact that this isn't fake or they're parodying kung fu?
Yeah, I think so. So basically, it's kind of like the spaghetti westerns. The way that that went from sort of serious, violent spaghetti westerns to political allegories, and then ultimately went to parody. This movement did the same. I mean, ultimately, it became so popular and so rife that it was only a matter of time before parodies came in. And we did actually want to avoid the out and out comedies like They Call Me Bruce or A Fistful of Yen in the Kentucky Fried Movie. But one of the most famous Bruceploitation films, The Dragon Lives Again, is definitely tongue in cheek. And there's humor in a lot of these movies. The biopics, not so much. There's many biopics of Bruce Lee, all which give a different story of what his life was. But then there's the kind of spin-offs where he's like Bruce Lee in New Guinea, where he's fighting a snake clan, or Bruce Lee the Invincible, where he's fighting people in gorilla suits and stuff like that. I mean, they're clearly, or Bruce Lee versus Superman, where he becomes a superhero. So they're clearly, not supposed to be serious. But The Dragon Lives Again is kind of the ultimate Bruceploitation film starring Bruce Leung, where he is in hell and wakes up and he has to fight his way out of hell to go back to Earth. And he ends up fighting the Godfather, the Exorcist, Emmanuel, Laurel and
Dracula.
Hardy are in there. Popeye's his sidekick. Who else? Dracula is in there. There's the man with no name, Zatoichi, the swordsman. So he fights all of these like pop culture characters, and that's definitely meant to be funny as well.
You know, it's very interesting to me because often, especially like my people my age, I'm 58, so I'm a second generation monster kid. And people associate genre film with nostalgia. But these films are coming out, and I think Severin is coming into the market with its box sets of a lot of different people, but especially this one at a time when there's a younger audience that's connecting with this stuff and really interested in it. And these people are going out and becoming filmmakers themselves.
Mhm.
Um, you're sort of like the home entertainment trauma in some ways, and you're inspiring all these people to understand something that previously had only kind of been the stuff of, oh, hey, let's go get this because I remember it, seeing it when I was a kid.
Yeah, and I think there's more and more of that happening now because the people who are the collectors are definitely the Severin audience and other boutique labels like Blue Underground and Vinegar Syndrome. There's quite a few of us now who are really kind of digging far and wide to find cinema that isn't just the stuff that's known and that we saw when we were teenagers from the video shop, although there's still quite a lot of that. But particularly the work that Kayla Janice is doing with us, she's digging into corners of the earth and unearthing films that I'd never heard of. And that's very exciting. The fact that particularly she's able to sort of package them together like she did with the folk horror box set, where All the Haunts Be Ours, where, all of a sudden people may not know the movies individually, but as a whole, and the way that she is contextualize everything in a scholarly way in a beautifully designed package, it's worth, it's something that's worth seeing. So we're doing quite a lot more of that. I mean, we're doing some more Indonesian films. The latest documentary I'm finishing is about an Indonesian horror star called Susanna,
Oh,
who was basically, the probably the biggest female horror star that there is, who, apart from Barbara Steele, who was not the victim, she was the monster. So she was not the final girl or the one being chased. she was actually the persecutor. So Susanna was a very interesting character, and I wanted to know more. So we went and did a documentary about that. So that's just finishing now. So anyway, yes, basically there is a lot more to learn in with this kind of cinema, and I think what's exciting is that the audiences like us, they want to see more. They want to know more about this kind of this kind of filmmaking that they may not be aware of, or that they are aware of, and they want to see in a much better condition than they've ever seen it before.
Well, and you're interesting too because you started out in home entertainment, and you became a filmmaker. And when I think of you, I often think of like Martin Scorsese or Nicholas Winding Refn, who have gone back into the world of home entertainment releases to try to preserve and try to put stuff out there, but they haven't actually done documentaries. And you're out there actually doing these documentaries. And I mean, I think of people like, where would we have been without David Scull, right?
Mhm.
And so sad that we lost him this last January, I believe it
Very
was.
much so. Yeah.
Uh, and you're part of that new vanguard of not only just preserving cinema history, but of celebrating it in a right way. I mean, one never has the feeling from you that you would go out and make these kinds of movies.
Mhm. I don't know.
You
I've
love them.
tried. I made a couple of narrative features, Plague Town and Theatre Bizarre, which was an anthology. But I can tell you, I would not be able to make a living if I continued pursuing being a contemporary dramatic filmmaker. So it's still on the cards. But I did actually start in the US side of the business with Bill Lustig, who also was a filmmaker who then dedicated his expertise to restoring and unearthing films. And I would say he's the one who really kind of popularized what it is that all the boutique labels do when he was producing for Anchor Bay, which is when I first came out to the US. And it was because of a documentary I made about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that he was briefly in that we became friendly, and he brought me out to do all the extras for Anchor Bay. So basically, I was originally doing special features, and then ultimately got into the sort of production side of things on discs.
I mangled your history a little bit there. Are you I, I'm getting ready to graduate seminary, right? In sort of the third stage of my life. And that required a lot of bravery. It required a lot of risk taking.
Mm-hmm.
And I have discovered in my life that that's really the history of exploitation cinema. That's really the history of filmmaking, of creativity, of artistry, of life. Is when you stop taking those risks, you stop living. And you have gone out and done that. You've modeled that. And I'm curious, do you, and I don't mean this to be a facile question, but what has prompted you to take those scary risks? Particularly in, being associated with things that, at the time there weren't a whole lot of other people going, hey, we need a box set of this, or we need this and that.
Yeah, well, that is pure madness in terms of how far we have gone with some of these box sets, like the Black Emmanuel box set or the Al Adamson Masterpiece Collection. It's
I
it's
would
sort of
compare that
it's
to
a,
my
it's
fifty
a,
thousand
it's a
dollars a
collector
set.
it's a collector mentality where you want things to be complete. So the Al Adamson box did not start out as the comprehensive entire filmography of Al Adamson. But what with the documentary happening and me needing film clips, I needed to find the film elements. And I was talking to Sam Sherman a lot because, of course, he was involved with Al all along. So ultimately, it started as something that was going to be an extra on Dracula versus Frankenstein, and then just continued ballooning into what it eventually became. And you could say the same thing about the Black Emmanuel set. It basically did the same thing. We can't do that with the Bruceploitation set because there's just too many of these movies, for one. But also, there are no film elements on a lot of these movies. Like there's a lot of archaeology that's going on in order to find just a 35 millimeter element to transfer in the correct aspect ratio. And some of them, even some of the bigger ones like Exit the Dragon, Enter the Tiger, that we cannot find a complete film element. There's a couple of really crappy prints that are falling apart, but they're missing sequences. So
So
yeah,
maybe
but going back to the original question, the fact is it doesn't seem like that much of a leap for me because this is what I've been passionate about since I was, first started watching movies as a kid, like a lot of the collectors of this kind of stuff are. This is something we've been passionate about since childhood almost, or at least the teenage years. So for me, it's kind of an extension of not being able to get a lot of these movies when I was in high school, particularly in England, where they were all banned, and having that mentality of trying to find people where we can find the best copy of a certain film that we want to see that at least wasn't, in color and well, didn't have, Greek subtitles burnt into the halfway through the frame, that kind of thing. So I think it's just really an extension of that. And now I actually feel very lucky that I am able to and indulge this as a profession, not just as a hobby.
well, it's um, we tread in sort of a weird ground as fans of this, and I will totally agree with you about the madness that sort of propels you through your passions in life, and I feel that way about the things that I'm passionate about, and certainly about the things I've taken the biggest risks with. But the weird aspect of what we do as fans of this kind of stuff is on the one hand, everybody loves a bad movie. Everybody loves to sit around and chuckle with their friends and sort of marvel at the folly of
Mhm.
people trying to do something. As G.K. Chesterton said, that anything worth doing is worth doing badly. And you encounter a lot of that. But at the same time, that's almost like a phase that you pass through. And then you can watch a film like Butcher Baker, Nightmare Maker, and you can lose yourself in how over the top it is, and the fact that it's Jimmy McNichol and all these character actors that sort of maybe were not at the top of their career at that time. But then you see the commitment, and then you see the that there is artistry there, and that there is a real desire to there's a real relating that can go on. I mean, I don't know. I would have been Jimmy McNichol looks better shirtless than me. So I mean.
Yeah, well, I will say though, as somebody who has made films, it's you don't set out to do a bad film. You know what I mean? You use the resources that you have to make it as good as you possibly can. So I always have that in mind. But I would go one step further and say that I'm more likely to watch Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker again than I am to watch Oppenheimer again. So
Right.
therefore,
Right.
I actually don't see these films as bad movies in any way. I mean, I
Right.
find them, very entertaining. Obviously there are flaws, and those flaws do actually make us laugh sometimes, particularly in, Bruceploitation movies or things like that, where they're really working on no money and they really have to try and, get to the finish line of making a movie that's releasable. But there's something really admirable in that. And basically, these movies were made even cheaper than a lot of the drive-in horror movies that we're familiar with, and they were relying on people who had martial arts skill and a fearlessness to jump off bridges into dirty water underneath, or jump off moving cars, or things like that. That shit's not easy. So
No,
it's like there is definitely expertise within, even if it's not in the kind of way that we traditionally think of as great cinema.
I think, and you said the key word. You said entertaining. I was interviewing Elijah Wood once, and the subject of guilty pleasures came up, and he said something that I loved and I've always treasured. And that was that there's no such thing as a guilty pleasure. There's only what you like and what you don't like.
Right.
And
Mhm.
I'm with you. The thing about a film like Oppenheimer is it's very profound, and you
Yeah, and
watch
I
it and you
liked
want
it.
to
Don't
get
get me
out of it.
wrong. I did
But
like, yeah.
but that repeat value why am I watching Chuck Russell's remake of The Blob for the 50th time? Why am I
Yes.
watching Let's Scare Jessica to Death? Well, that's not a good example because that's such
Yeah.
a shining light. But
Yeah.
I mean, I think
But
it's
it
a
doesn't even have to be something that you're like chuckling at or
no,
popcorning. Like Threads, for example, is a film that
yes,
we've released, which is a film that I also revisit, usually to upset myself, but and send myself back to the trauma of first seeing it on the BBC. But still, there is a power to that movie that
Did you
that
see it
there
when it
isn't
came
in
out?
Oppenheimer. Sorry?
Did you see Threads when it came out? One
I
of the
did.
first
I
ones?
saw it on the BBC when it aired. Yeah, and I was 12.
I
So
was
it, you know.
same when I saw Day After. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was, I'd seen Day After as well, which also disturbed me. But when Threads came on, I just remember a palpable depression over the entire country. I mean, it was only in my sort of small world of, being a 12-year-old, but it still seemed like everybody was talking about it. My auntie was talking about it to her friends and that sort of thing. And it was just like, oh my God. And it was like, oh my God, this might actually happen. It was, horrifying. But an extremely powerful movie and one that we're proud. So it doesn't have to all be like sort of silly action movies and that sort of thing. But it's again it's that stuff that you want to put on. It's the stuff that you are entertained by, whether it's for being disturbed or for chuckling or whatever it may be.
Well, there's community that builds up around genre cinema, and uh, that does not build up around, I don't think, most mainstream cinema.
Yeah,
That I've seen you certainly be part of, and I know at places like Fantastic Fest, I've really felt it. Just a sense of like acceptance and celebration
yes,
and individual. Hey, what are you into? And people walking away
absolutely.
with some common ground.
Absolutely. I love meeting people at the screenings and things like that and just getting into a conversation about, how we first saw these films or what films we're working on now and all that kind of thing. It's great because we're all kind of in the same boat really as similar film fans.
Do you think people are going to be surprised when they get into this new box set and they look at how good these films look? Because most of us saw them, if we saw them at all, in just really crappy, torn up versions.
Yeah, but I will say that there are some of them that aren't that are still we still had to use 35 millimeter release prints for a couple of them. We did find answer prints. We even found the negative on one or two of them. But for the most part, that stuff is gone. So basically, it was the result of our research was sometimes finding a print in South Africa, and that's what we had to use to scan and restore. So therefore, it's not quite up to the level sometimes of say the Black Emanuels, but that said, this is the best that they've ever looked, and this is in a lot of cases the first time you've seen them in the correct aspect ratio. Because these films were transferred to tape in the early 80s, and the producers just thought that's all they would ever need. So they got rid of the negatives and kept the tape. But the tape is only, a portion of the actual frame that was shot in the 2:3:5 aspect ratio. So to at least have the entire image and have it color corrected is a big start. But I do think, you will see that there's a variety in these films. You will know that there is a difference between a Bruce Lee film and a Dragon Lee film and a Bruce Lee film. You'll see that and hopefully the documentary helps kind of paint the picture that basically there is a lot more to this than just exploiting the death of Bruce Lee.
Oh, absolutely. So no one ever interviews you that I've ever heard without doing what I'm about to do next, which is to get you to tease us what you can about what Severin is up to next. You've mentioned a box set, you've
Yeah.
mentioned Indonesia. Oh man, has there been some great stuff out of Indonesia in the last few years? And we've had a few releases in the United States, but not many. Are we about to see a wave of potential titles coming at us from that vintage period of Indonesian
Indonesian
filmmaking
cinema?
horror?
Not necessarily, because this documentary is for another box set, which is themed. So therefore, it's like one Indonesian film among films from all other parts of the world. However, we have also got several other Susanna films coming. But I can tell you that we have Spanish collections coming up. We have our 4K of opera has been doing the rounds to be on the kind of higher end of things. We have our mid-year sale coming up where we're dropping 9 new titles. And then we have at least 3 titles a month for the rest of the year. We have a director who has been woefully underrepresented in the disc era, who we have just restored 5 of his films, and they'll be coming out this summer. But I'm going to leave it there because I've got to go to my next
And we're
interview.
running out of time on Zoom, and I am going to keep reviewing the amazing titles you guys are putting out.
Awesome.
4K on
Yep.
all of these amazing titles. Thank you, David, for taking the time.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Anytime.
Have a good one.
Take care.